something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Howdy, occupiers. You've got Getch here. Another episode of Occupy TV. I believe we're at number 48 now. I wrote a big long intro, but Joe told me I can't do it. So I'm just going to say, here we are, Occupy Eugene Media Group, Occupy Media, and we're trying to have a big long conversation with the nation about why did the Occupy movement happen. Today, we're going to talk with a guy who I think has some insights into that. Dan Carlin. He's got two podcasts, Occupy, or no, you don't have any kind of Occupy podcast.
I don't have any kind of Occupy, yes.
Yes, I do. I have one of those. We do. But Hardcore History and Common Sense are Dan's podcasts. And let's talk about those, I guess.
Well, I'm actually glad to be here talking about the Occupy thing, only because I've given a lot of unasked for, unneeded, unwarranted, and unappreciated advice to occupiers on the program. And they often criticize me for sort of an armchair general approach to their tactics and strategies. And I think that's warranted criticism, by the way. So this gives me a chance to say that I came on, answered some questions, talked a little about this, and tried to show some understanding and some appreciation for the fact that there are people out there, you know, taking their days and their times and their effort to try to foster change as best they can. And, you know, I did that as a younger person, and you don't know best how to do it sometimes. And sometimes you have to kind of improvise and make decisions as you go along based on conditions. And so I don't want to be too harshly critical without being able to come on and show some sort of appreciation, solidarity for what they're doing too.
I remember specifically the one program on Common Sense where you gave advice on how to deal with our message. I think, you know, I don't remember the exactly what your message was about how we should deal with our message. I do remember thinking that we had discussed the very same issues in General Assembly. So you weren't too far off base, is my
Well, and you know what I think it is? It's funny because when you're out there doing these things, and I did it too, and I know you did it too, you know, you're in your early 20s, and in the middle 80s, this was problems we had with U.S. foreign policy in Central America, divestment in South Africa. These were things that were important to us. And now you get 20 years later and you say, gosh, you know, I can see things we should have done better back then, but the people who are 22, 23 now, they don't want to hear that the same way we didn't want to hear it back in the middle 80s. And so, I mean, you feel like you can offer some sort of advice. I think there's almost like a historical generation thing that allows a forgetfulness to develop on purpose, where the people out in the field don't necessarily want to hear from people who aren't out in the field how they could be doing things better. And usually it's organizational. You know, when you say, you know, you could organize this better, and they're like, well, you come and do it yourself if you can do a better job.
Oh yeah, that's definitely,
and rightly so, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's a definite sense that, hey, we're putting in the time. What are you doing? Talking about it.
Sure, and that's understandable.
Yeah, that happens within the movement too. You know, you get.
Well, that's the old. You know, I was a punk in the old days, and we used to talk about how unwelcoming the whole punk rock movement was to new people, and it was always, you're a poser, you're a poser. When did you first start listening? And I always thought, God, that's a really great way to kill a movement. You know, when you're instantly questioning, you're not welcoming, you don't want more people, you're instantly questioning, are you an agent provocateur, or are you just somebody who wants to come and meet girls at the rally, or whatever it was. Right. But listen, again, I think that follows a normal historical pattern, sort of.
Right, yeah. And I don't even know if we talk so much about the agent provocateur as much as we used to. Because an agent provocateur needs to have action to really have an impact. You know, the agent, you know, they've got to be the one to convince somebody to throw a brick through a windshield, or, you know, something like that.
Well, and listen, I mean, it sounds paranoid. Of course, an agent provocateur is someone who's planted by some other element, oftentimes to take what might be a peaceful situation and extol a level of violence that moves things in a different direction, so that you have an excuse to crack down.
Exactly.
It sounds paranoid, but they did this in the 60s.
Well, and there's evidence they did it in Oakland and in New York too.
So I mean, when you have a history of it, it's no longer paranoid. It's part of the playbook.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And I don't know if you've ever played Are You a Werewolf, or, you know, Hitman, where you all get together and you try to figure out who's the werewolf, or and then each round you knock somebody out until you either get killed by the werewolf or you win. Same thing I think would work with are you an agent provocateur in the Occupy setting. You know, it creates paranoia, but at the same time you need to confront it. You need to bring it out in the open. So
well, and I think you need to plan around the fact that there's a decent likelihood that that's going on. I mean, you could never prove it. I mean, you're going to sound paranoid if you talk about it, but past history shows there's a decent likelihood that's going on. So I think when somebody tries to take things to a more violent or more aggressive level, I think it's worth questioning what their motives might be.
Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Exactly. Now you were, let's see, I was trying to think, you were going on the paranoid concept, and I don't know, I was going to jump off on that, but I don't want to. I want to back up a little bit, though. So you are, I think you're kind of a heavy hitter in the podcast world.
I don't know how big that makes anybody, but we've been doing it a long time.
Yeah, well, I know that when I first started listening to podcasts, I'd go on iTunes and I'd see Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, was always among the top 10 that they were suggesting that you download. And that was 3 years ago.
We owe iTunes a debt of gratitude for that. It's become, hasn't it become almost like a TV channel, iTunes?
I think so.
And one that maybe more people are listening to than any of the regular broadcast media. So, I mean, and to be honest, iTunes and Apple have gone out of their way to promote independent podcasts like our own to show that, listen, you don't have to be ESPN, you don't have to be all these other groups. You can be just a regular person and do this too. I think it helps their interest to show that regular folks can produce media of a quality and with download numbers that rival, professional outlets.
Well, we weren't doing anything until I got us onto iTunes. Yeah, with our podcast.
All of a sudden, you're a worldwide. You're a TV channel on the equivalent of like a satellite broadcasting. You might be channel 620, but you're still on there.
Yeah. We're not hitting 500 million people or 500,000 people with our podcasts.
You haven't been doing it as long either. Give yourself some time.
Yeah. And we have some changes we want to make that will hopefully aim us in that direction. But you, on the other hand, are there, and you know the terrain. And how did you get there? So you started off in LA. You were just talking LA riots, field promotion, and then what? That turned you into a reporter?
Well, it's funny. Los Angeles. You were both from the same part of town, actually, and. Like anybody's hometown, it drags you back in whether you want to live there or not. And I went away to college in Colorado, came back, didn't know what I was going to do with my life, got a job at a news station getting coffee. It was the absolute lowest job you could get. And then these things would happen, whether they were the LA riots or other things that allowed you opportunities to move up and get attention. And the LA riots were the ultimate one for me. I went from being a worker on the assignment desk to like an assignment editor. And then the chance came to move in front of the camera, and I didn't want to do it. And I had all these guys who were reporters in LA who were only a little bit older than I was who said, you're going to die at this assignment desk if you don't get out here and leave. And so almost to please them and get them off my back, I sent out these tapes and got hired, and then you don't know what to do. Eugene, Oregon beckoned, and that's how I got up here.
So you came here for the work. You didn't come here for the...
I actually looked at the college back when I was looking at schools, but I ended up coming up here for the job,
Okay. And eventually, though, decided that as good as that was, the internet was better.
Well, I went from that into talk radio, and listen, when I got into radio was a fun gig. And I think anybody who's paid any attention has seen how that's gone down. I mean, from the standards. When I got into local radio here in town, from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night, it was all local personalities, done in-house, the whole thing. I don't think there's anything local on the radio station I used to work at all anymore, or very little. And so, I mean, that's how things have changed. So who would want to be in the radio business today? No offense, people in the radio business.
Right. Well, and all the big market shares that we have, they're just prepackaged and shipped in. The whole. I mean, not even. You're not like on at the NPR stations. You get an NPR program.
That's
and
right. You get a little break in. Yeah. It's a cost-saving measure.
Yeah, but for the rock stations, it's just the whole thing is pumped in 24 hours a day, and there's no variation.
Even the local DJs are pre-recording their stuff most of the time.
But that didn't work for you, and you decided that podcasting was gonna. There must have been an overlap period. I'm curious because we want to get something going here.
To me, you get to a certain point where you don't appreciate people who aren't doing. It's not arrogance as much as it is you're doing this work. and the station will hire people to come in who've never done this work to tell you how to do it better. If you run an auto plant and you bring a consultant in to tell you how to do it better, I bet they can do a great job. When you're doing any kind of work that requires art or artistic talent at all, to have someone come in and tell you how to do it and then just basically tell you to imitate some other guy who's doing it, that becomes something you don't appreciate very quickly. What podcasting did was open up a blank slate that said you can do anything you want. You don't have to worry about ratings. You don't have to worry about the show that leads into you or the one that comes out of you. You don't have to then go talk to some consultant about what you're doing wrong or how you could be more like Rush Limbaugh or one of these other people. And so I think at that time, the artistic, I mean, you talk about hardcore history. We do 2 podcasts, and the Common Sense one is a lot like an AM radio show. Hardcore history is not like anything.
Right.
And it was the fact that you had this blank artistic slate, which everybody who podcasts has, that allowed us to try this really weird experiment. And I mean, no consultant would have let me do that in radio in a million years. And can you imagine it with commercial breaks? I mean, it wouldn't have worked.
No.
So for me, the attraction is that it's the total artistic freedom.
Did you, I mean, when you started, podcasting was still
in its infancy.
in its infancy.
Well, and you know what?
So you had a vision for what it could be.
I told my colleague that I do these things with, it's really a 2-man operation, that what we wanted to do, we could see where it was going. We had a friend of ours who had worked for Apple and knew that iTunes was coming out. And he said, do this now. Now's the time. Get in now. And the plan was to treat it like an Oklahoma land rush, where, you know, knowing everybody will come eventually, we were going to go in, stake our little piece of land, and then when ESPN and all those other people inevitably got in, we were going to try to hold our little piece of territory. What ended up happening is when all those big outlets started doing podcasts, which they just used mostly as a distribution vehicle for their regular programming, another way to catch SportsCenter.
More listeners.
Right,
yeah.
but then they would advertise, hey, you know, check out our podcast, which in a sense helped every other podcast, because once you download your first one, you're a podcast listener.
That's right.
And you see how easy it is. Then you start downloading other things. So every time ESPN or any one of these other outlets would say, hey, catch our blah, blah, blah podcast, we knew that they were just adding potential listeners for us too. So we wanted to defend that little Oklahoma land rush piece of land we got in 2005 or whenever it was. So that's a great advantage. So when you talk about not having as many listeners as we have, we've been doing this a long time.
Oh yeah. So I don't minimize that.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were there at the beginning too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, or as close to the beginning
as you
could get.
Yeah. There may not be a defined point when it started. But okay.
There are people who will claim that there are. I mean, you know, but not, Adam Curry and people like that.
Yeah. And you were talking about AM radio. I was listening to the Dennis Miller Show podcast, and that's AM radio.
Is he just rebroadcasting his radio feed, basically?
I think so. Yeah. And it has all the hallmarks of it too. You know, there are lots of sexist remarks and dumb jokes and everything.
But you know what? And that's what I try to explain to people. A podcast is like you're cutting out the middleman, and the middleman is the transmitter. And you know, I wrote a piece once where we talked about how the entire history of art has been one where you have a middleman who controls the distribution network. I mean, if you're in ancient Greece and you're Sophocles and you're writing a play, there's some guy who owns that amphitheater, and he gets to read your play ahead of time and decide whether or not you get to perform it. And he may look at it and go, you know, I like most of this play, but I want you to cut line 5, 6, or 7, or you don't get to show your stuff to an audience. Radio's like that. Theater's like that. You know, acting in Hollywood's always been like that. Podcast allows you to own the transmitter. It's a very democratized version of art and media, and allows you to show your work to the public without approval of a middleman first. And that's, to me, what makes it so incredibly democratic. And so when you talk about Dennis Miller and how he uses it, that's one way you can use it. Just rebroadcast something you're already doing as a different distribution method for people who aren't by the radio when your show's on. But you could do content in addition to that, extra content, or you can do like what Adam Carolla's doing now. He's another AM radio guy who went to it, and he does an absolutely brand new show just like we do, just for the internet. So I mean, the potential's unlimited. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, revolutionary almost.
No, not almost. Absolutely.
Absolutely revolutionary. Well, that was one of the things I wanted to get to is you know, back in the 80s when the stagnation of the middle class was really kicking in, we didn't have the distribution of the internet to see it. You know, I remember back in the late 80s when media was consolidating. I think it was consolidating down into just 20 some odd corporations.
We saw that here in Eugene in the 90s, absolutely.
Yeah, and we're saying, oh man, can you imagine when it gets down to 5 corporations? and now we can watch almost real time as each new corporation gets kicked off of the island, and there's fewer and fewer corporations controlling what we get out of the message that we're receiving is. I
think this is why these acts where they talk about net neutrality and everything becomes so important. These ideas that you could see. I have a belief, unsubstantiated by any proof at all, that the media giants would like to get control of content again as best they can. And the best way to do that when it comes to podcasts, for example, or other blogs or anything like that, is to slow down service to us. While creating, they won't say we're going to slow down. They say we're going to speed up, content from NBC or Viacom or any of these people.
Right.
But we'll have the effect of making it take a whole day to download my podcast or something. There are legitimate arguments about, we paid for this infrastructure, so we should be able to do whatever we want with it. But the net result, when you talk about the democratization of media, is if we can't keep these channels open where regular people can do this anymore, then you do cede control of it to the big 5 or 6 giants.
You just recreate cable.
That's right. You recreate what used to be. Right now, basically, you have a situation where it's not so bad that these 5 media giants own all those stations, as long as you have this other outlet available. If you take that away, then it becomes like, Big Brother controlling their 5 or 6 stations, and you have choke points where you can shut down messages and views and things like that.
Yeah, well, and they'll keep a certain flow. I mean, you're going to keep the cat videos flowing no matter what, because that's going to work that's going to work in unison with what they want. Getting everybody to follow, a packaged message.
And dumbing it down. I mean, you find any. Gore Vidal died the other day, and I was going back on YouTube and seeing some of his television appearances in the late '60s and his debates with other intellectuals like William F. Buckley and stuff. It's the old classic black and white, everybody smoking a cigarette, these intellectual conversations. And you think, oh my Lord, could they even do that today in today's media?
Well, I saw that one clip, and that particular clip felt to me almost like it spawned the...
Do you mean the one where he and Buckley were about to get into a fight?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a famous clip from the Democratic National Convention where he makes a quip about Buckley being a crypto-fascist Nazi, and Buckley says, I'll sock you in the nose. That is as wild as TV got back in those days. And you're right, it's almost like that's the proto-crossfire approach that came out.
Yeah.
But that was an anomaly. Most of the time, you could have these really deep intellectual conversations that you just literally can't imagine television producing these days anymore.
Because every time somebody says something that's kind of intelligent, they're endangering some advertisers' market share,
Well, and listen, I've dealt enough with these people where they literally have a legitimate belief that people can't follow it. That they just that you're screening out huge numbers of people if you try to be intelligent. But it's a chicken and an egg thing. I mean,
we're just going to make people less and less intelligent.
I mean, if you had more of that intelligent stuff, more people would bring themselves up to speed. The more you dumb it down, the more it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that they can't handle anything but dumbed down content. So eventually you move, dumber and dumber and dumber, and then if you gave them something intelligent, they wouldn't know what to do with it.
And we don't know what to do with it is the trouble. We don't, we're getting all this stuff, but we're not used to having the freedom to get the information we need, I think, still. Most people, the Occupy movement, Arab Spring, Tea Party. Well, no, not the Tea Party. I don't think the Tea Party has been quite an internet phenomenon as much. It was more of a Fox News phenomenon, I feel like.
I have to tell you, and I get a lot of flack for this, remember, the Tea Party was really 2 different things. It started off as one thing, and then became the best example I can think of in the last 10 years of a movement being co-opted, which I think Occupy was in real danger of at one point as well. You remember, very early on, there was a lot of Democratic politicians flocking to the idea, and then when that edge appeared, you could see them back off because they don't want to be anywhere near anything edgy or anything. The people that support their campaigns. I mean, the Occupy people aren't the ones giving Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein a lot of money. The Tea Party group literally got co-opted, and you can tell because so many of the people that were involved initially, there was a very libertarian edge to it and a very anti-corruption edge to it, dropped out and just said, this isn't what we paid for, and all of a sudden you saw the Fox News crowd and everything move in, and talk about a movement being dumbed down. I mean,
totally.
But that's the absolute epitome of a co-opted movement, and that's the traditional way a 2-party system tries to put the lid on these insurrection movements from their own right and left.
Right.
Is you just go in, you co-opt it, you say, hey, you're our people, and all of a sudden it becomes vanilla, and then it just becomes a wing of a party after a while.
Well, and after the Tea Party was born, there was a sense, when does the left get their Tea Party?
That's right. It was almost like something you could predict. And remember, there was before the Occupy thing sprang up, there was this idea of a coffee party for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I remember
and that's
that.
But it's almost like the Democratic Party sitting down and brainstorming, going, how can we do our own thing? Because you energize the base, and you get everybody wants grassroots people that are willing to go door to door. Well, that's what the Tea Party became for the right, and the left was looking, how can we get our own grassroots base fired up, especially since the president, who fired up a lot of people the first time around, was going to have a hard time firing up a lot of those same people again.
Right. Yeah, and any hope of the Occupy firing up his base, I think, has been shot down because
when Goldman Sachs is your number one or number two campaign contributor, as they are for both Romney and Obama, hard time squaring the Occupy demands with that.
That's very true. That's very true. So, let me jump away from there. Let's go to a more holistic view here. Your view of the world, like the Tea Party came up. It had a good reason for rising initially. They're saying this is a swindle. We're giving $1 billion or $1 trillion to the banks when we really shouldn't be doing that. And I think that was the reason why the Tea Party came around.
It was a fiscal conservative insurrection kind of. Yes.
Yeah. And then when we had the Arab Spring, then we had Wisconsin with Scott Walker trying to kill the unions.
That's right.
And everybody rose up around that. And then we have Occupy. They're all coming from something, though. There's something. We use it at the beginning of our TV show. You mentioned it on a podcast. There's something happening here.
Right.
What it is ain't exactly clear.
The old Buffalo Springfield song. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because. When you talk about history, which of course I love, and I think you have an attraction to history as well.
Yeah.
It's so different looking back on things because you can't put yourself in the time period where people don't know how things are going to turn out. And part of what you can't tell is the lay of the land. You can feel a change. There's something blowing in the wind. What did Dylan say? But you don't know what. And so I think now is a perfect example where you see so many people unemployed, which is a catalyst. I mean, I remember doing a show here in Eugene, a radio show, and I was wondering why people weren't getting out and protesting the free trade agreements, which, let me just tell you, nobody cared about. I had Peter DeFazio on my radio program, and we were sitting there talking about these things before they were voted on, and I had every commercial break, the station manager would come in and say, stop talking about this. Nobody's calling, nobody cares, and nobody cared. It was 5 years after it passed, and all of a sudden you got these, New World Order
people
protests.
started realizing what happened.
Right. But when the vote's going on and you can actually make a difference, nobody gave a damn at all about those kind of things. Somebody called me up and said, listen, this uprising you want, Dan, these demonstrations don't happen when people are fat and happy and the market's doing well and everybody's got enough to eat and all that and football's on. They happen when people can't feed their children, they can't see a future, they are out of work and those kind of things. Well, fast forward to now, and that's starting to become a reality. So all of a sudden, people who could not be troubled because life isn't that bad to get up off their rear ends have a reason to do that. This is a wild card. Historically speaking, when you look at the 30s, for example, it's when times are really tough that you don't know what's going to happen, like we said, but it becomes a wild card that creates opportunity. Now, it can be a good opportunity, or you could look at what happened in Europe in the 1930s and see how that can be a double-edged sword.
Right. Now, my paranoid instincts wonder if it truly is a wild card, though, because when Patriot Act was being passed back at post 9/11.
Something else people didn't get upset about enough at the time.
Incredibly, because that was really obvious, I felt. And for the people who were upset about it, it seemed really obvious. But yeah, it went flying right on by.
And gets re-upped every time it comes up almost unanimously.
Even though it had written into it that this is an extraordinarily uncommon thing that we're doing, and when they wrote it, we accept that this goes against all of our principles, therefore we're going to put an expiration date on it.
That's right, a sunset clause.
Yeah, but that didn't happen.
Peter DeFazio actually told me, I hope Peter's not watching, he said that there were lots...
I hope Peter is watching.
He said that there were lots of, and that this is not uncommon, that there are lots of parts to be filled in later in all these kinds of things, and when you vote for these things, you're voting basically that it's okay. I give permission to have these specifics filled in later. well, my goodness, when it's something as groundbreaking and as Orwellian as, I mean, just calling something a Patriot Act, just calling something Homeland Security,
yeah.
I mean, that's like a bad Star Trek episode from the 60s where they're trying to, you know, bring black shirt and brown shirt Gestapo into some U.S. country or Rome country and try to make it all work. I mean, this is like a little Orwellian dream, and it happens so slowly that to even say that, you know, there was a line from a historian, and the line was that to be considered a dangerous radical these days, all you have to do is go around spouting the slogans of the Founding Fathers. That was Charles Austin Beard that said that. And that's true. You'll get yourself on a watch list now if you start spouting Thomas Jefferson stuff around town. How weird is that? But it's a frog in a hot water thing. You don't realize how slowly these things happen, and then you turn around and it's different.
And that's the point that I'm wondering about. When I was asking if is it really unforeseen? Is this really a wild card? Because as they're cranking up the heat, as the corporate media and you know, the oppressive government, whatever we want to talk about, the corporate government, as they're cranking up the heat, they know eventually it's going to get to the point where that frog either has to jump out or fry, and something has to happen at that point. You know, because we can't all jump out. We're not all going to get fried. So we're going to be responding. And when they're killing Glass-Steagall and starting to expose the banks to the losses that are coming from casino capitalism, they have to know that eventually there's going to be a response. So I tend to wonder, is this as much a wild card, or are we even now in a point that is accounted for?
Well, remember, when I say wild card means wild card. It means, I mean, you know, 1932 in Germany was a wild card. That didn't go the way anybody wants it to go, though. I mean, a wild card literally can turn, you just turn the frog water thing to boil, and that's the wild card.
And that's it.
That's right. So you don't know what that means. I mean, the thing people forget is go look at 1968, which was probably the most violent year in the past 50 years in this country. There were riots and police brutality, or whatever you want to call it, at levels that we couldn't believe today. And we're not there yet. So when you talk about how bad things are, you know, you look at an Anaheim situation, or you look at some of these riots that happened recently. Yeah, but that's nothing compared to what they had in '68. So if you're not even there yet, we have a long way to go before you get from where we are now to when you reach a critical mass.
And we're not even where we were at the LA riots.
No.
In many respects. No. However, one of the things, you know, I've been trying to build a correspondence pool for our program. So I've got people down in LA who I've had going down to Anaheim and getting reports on what's happening. And they're telling me, and I'm seeing it on YouTube and everything, that we have cops out in Anaheim who they'll have police written on their jackets or whatever, but they don't have any insignia that shows what their jurisdiction is.
They're wearing camo too, which is always, I mean, this is military gear. They're carrying AR-15s. You know, this is, and we talked about it in a recent Common Sense podcast episode where we talked about the militarization of the police. There used to be pretty strict rules in this country about how militarized the police could get, or whether or not we could use the actual military as police. But when you blur the differences by creating a police force that you can't tell a whole lot of difference between that and the military, when they're coming in with armored vehicles, then you don't even have to worry about bringing the military in. You've just turned the police into something that's more of a paramilitary force.
Then posse comitatus is
yes,
no longer a big deal.
Yes, the Posse Comitatus Act. Well, and I think they basically repealed that part of the Patriot Act.
Or we have, they have.
But I'd like to point out something different, because I don't want, and I think this is a problem I tried to talk about with the Occupy folks, and they didn't want to hear it very much. I want to make people understand that when you have a pay-for-play system the way we have now, it's not just what we would consider to be the corrupting elements of the right that are part of the problem. And this is where I feel like the Occupy movement falls a little flat. The left has its own elements that warp the system too, and by not acknowledging that, you create a divide that doesn't allow the Occupy people to unite with the people on the other side of the political spectrum that are just as upset about the corrupt system as they are. I mean, if you look at who the top contributors are to the major politicians, yes, they're Goldman Sachs, but they're also public employee unions, you know, Scott Walker and that thing. I mean, that's crazy, but it's not crazy to notice, if you're talking about money warping a system, that it comes from all sides. Now, this may be a chicken and egg thing. You may say, if you have a pay-for-play system, system, unless you want to get steamrolled by the opposition, you got to play and pay. At the same time, if you say we want the corporations' money out, but we're not going to say a thing about the unions, you lose all those people who are just as upset about a corrupt system on the other side. We interviewed Green Party candidate Jill Stein in the last conference. And she understands, and so did the Libertarian candidates we interviewed before her, that if third parties and independent candidates are really going to make any headway in this country, they've got to unite over the fact that the bloody system is corrupt. And you have to fix that. And we can argue about the specifics once we have a clean system. Because if you don't, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose on your specific issue du jour. The system's not going to translate that into what you want anyway, because it's the corrupt problem. You have to fix that, which most people can, you don't get a whole lot of Americans saying, no, I'm for a corrupt system and I'm voting for people who will keep the corrupt system. We all want a clean system. We can argue about what we want that system to do after we clean it up.
Right. Now, 3 directions I want to go in, so hopefully you can remember all 3 of them.
I'll try.
I want to touch upon what was happening in Anaheim, but before I forget the other 2 items, the power of money in politics, I think that the internet, we have a way to avoid that, and not just by getting people out on the internet, when they're running for, whatever position they're running for, and also common sense, your program, as a bridge between these 2 polar opposites, because I think you've staked out a place between the 2 extremes of Occupy and the Tea Party, the true Tea Party.
I was going to say, please, make the distinction, sure.
Yeah, I mean, not the caricature of the Tea Party. But, so keep those in mind.
Okay.
Let's get back to Anaheim for a second, though. My understanding, and this is just stuff I picked up off of Facebook postings and whatnot, is that, I guess because of the NDAA, where we basically rescinded posse comitatus and everything, there's something in there that says that we can now have private security forces actually arresting American citizens right now.
I don't know about that.
You don't know about that?
No, I don't know about that.
I would love to find out about that. I want to do a whole show based on discussing the potential, how police state are we now? And
whether you can outsource that?
Apparently that's what I want to find out. I don't know if we can or can't. But then the other thing being, how much, you're saying that Anaheim is still pretty low key. However, it seems to me we're using rubber bullets more than we ever did before, and now we're changing, they've got these rubber pellets that they're shooting now.
They have a lot of, 60 Minutes, almost 15 years ago now, did a whole show on the new crowd control devices that were being invented. We did a podcast that I entitled The Very Velvet Fist a long time ago, and it was about how if you create, there's a certain power. Go back to the '68 Democratic National Convention where you're just there's a certain power. It's the same thing Gandhi did when he did that great Salt March, and he told his followers to simply walk into the batons of the British soldiers who were smacking them on the head, because there's a power in that. If it's like I said, if you could go up to the lunch counter where Martin Luther King was doing his protest, the segregated lunch counter, and instead of having to actually haul him off and handcuff him, and there's some beautiful iconic photos that Time magazine did and Life magazine did at the time, if you could simply walk up to him and tase him, and boom, it's over and he's gone, do you diffuse the power? I mean, the same thing, if you could just pepper spray Gandhi's protesters in the Salt March, do you diffuse the power of that? And then go to the '68 convention. If you could put these people in a free speech zone, the way we're going to do with the Republican convention, instead of allowing their free speech to be citywide, and I think that's what it's meant to do. Do you diffuse this whole element of civil disobedience and the power to essentially sacrifice your head or your well-being for your beliefs? You diffuse it
because people don't get to see the people who are expressing their free speech. However, right now, and this is what rocketed Occupy into the headlines, is there will be people who won't go into those free speech zones, and those people are going to be marching into the billy clubs, the batons.
There was a line, and it had to do with Soviet Russia, where a Russian writer who was forced to go to the Gulag wrote how nefarious the Russian system was at the time. He said, they deny you the chance to even be a martyr for your cause because they simply make you disappear from the scene. So your family doesn't know what happens, or nobody knows that you died for a cause, so they essentially just remove you. I have a feeling that they're going to have people targeted as a disruptor, and things like that ahead of time, and they're going to neutralize those people.
Those people will spend the duration of the convention behind bars.
Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, not to sound paranoid, but
I don't think we're at the point yet where we're going to have people disappear entirely.
No. But denying them the ability to be a martyr. If you could tase Martin Luther King, is he as useful as? Or if you could release his internet searches or what he was doing online. I mean, people forget that the FBI sent a tape of him having sex with women who weren't his wife and said, "Kill yourself." Yeah, get out of the. I mean, the virtual way to do that now, not saying this will happen, ladies and gentlemen, is to plant child porn on someone's computer and just say, "Look what we found on Martin Luther King's computer. Are you really going to follow this guy?"
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you undercut the value of those leaders right out from under. Now, this isn't where we are now, but
apparently that is where we are.
15 years.
Apparently, that is where we are now. I can't remember the issue though, so I won't.
But you know what I'm saying is that if you're smart, you look at where we were 10 years ago, how far we've gone in 10 years, and then project this outward. If the current trends continue at the current pace, where are we 10 years from now? I don't think it's logical to think we're going to go backwards and repair this damage. I mean, I think things have to. The 1970s is proving to be the high water mark for this country in terms of opening up the government, examining. I mean, they had the Church and Pike Committee hearings where they literally opened up the CIA files and showed what things were going on and issued reforms. I mean, the whole FISA law and everything stems from that date. That's proven to be
that environmental President Nixon back then.
You know, isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? If you'd have said that, Hunter Thompson actually said that today Nixon would be considered a centrist and he'd vote for him. I mean, there was no bigger enemy to Richard Nixon than Hunter Thompson.
Right,
so I mean, it gives you an idea of how things have moved in this country in a different direction. And I think, like I said, I think the original Tea Party people noticed it. I think the Occupy people noticed it. And I think if you alienate any of these potential groups out there by, you know, it's like the Occupy people when they get too into the wealth disparity. I feel like you're gonna rule out a lot of people that like the idea of getting rich and all these other things. When what we really want is a clean system.
This is true. Yeah,
you know, and so don't peel off any potential allies in this thing, because we need all the Americans if you're going to actually make progress against a machine that's got all the impetus in its favor right now.
All right. So given that lead-in, I want to talk about common sense as the bridge between these two polar opposites, because I agree. When I am expressing my opinion, I tend to lean towards the left quite a bit.
And you're allowed to.
And I'm allowed to.
Sure.
But I don't want to exclude people who don't agree with me, because I want to have the knowledge that they have to help me.
If you talk about we the people, right? The people is a very broad group.
With a wide variety of opinions.
And they need to feel, I mean, I always say that the more that you alienate the other side, the weaker you become, because you need them too. I mean, there's a real belief out there that we are kept divided. And we're kept divided over these issues of the day, which are really important specifically. I mean, take the issue of the Chick-fil-A homosexual comments that are out there recently. Of course, this is important stuff to people. But it's another thing to keep us from focusing on the really big issues. We can fight about that later.
Right.
You know, I mean, there are people that are laughing that we're fighting over that right now, and happy that we are, and making money out of that issue.
Well, isn't that what the abortion issue is all about?
There are all these wedge issues, which are actually, you know, they're important.
Gay marriage,
yes, but they're important. I don't want to dispute that, but you've got to have a triage of importance. There are people in this country, I won't mention any names, who are professional dividers, who make millions off of dividing Americans by demonizing one side and the other. And there are people laughing all the way to the bank because of that. Because if you're focusing on your evil neighbor, you're not focusing on the big problem at hand.
Well, let's focus on instead.
That's what common sense does, by the way. I mean, we try to acknowledge the fact that, listen, we're all in this together, and we're not getting out of it unless we operate together. Stop demonizing your neighbor, stop dividing the country, and fix the system, and we'll fight about the specifics later. Once we have a clean system, then we can see what the American people want, and there'll be a clean system to implement that will of the people.
So do you consciously, when you look at an issue, because I've definitely noticed, you do stake out an unusual terrain when you're commenting.
I'm not a normal person. Let's be. Ask my family.
That's why I invited you in here. Yeah.
But I think most people are. I mean, I used to say that most people you can find are more one way than the other, a little more left than right or whatever. But then you could find this issue or that issue that defies the stereotype. And then most of us are like Martians on one or two weird issues if you actually pull it out of us.
And those are the ones we try not to mix up with everybody else.
But that's normal. And,
right.
and I think this attempts to put us into boxes and then demonize the other side, again, is all part of this divide and conquer. We have two parties. Anything else is fringe. I mean, and I think people get caught up in this so much. I went on the Young Turks program, and the guy who hosted that could not believe that I wasn't a closet something. And we spent the whole show with him trying to divine what I was hiding. And finally, by the end of the program, he was just confused. And I thought, why is this so hard to understand that you actually might not fit into one of these boxes and that that's okay?
Well, the majority of us don't fit into those boxes.
That's right. And that's what we're trained to think that we do.
Right, yeah. And so I think that's one of the things that your program is accomplishing, is pointing out that, there is no hardcore left and right. There's just a whole bunch of people mixing it up, and yeah, it's all that interlap area, which is the important area.
And remember, the left and right, those are holdovers from the French Revolution. I mean, we're talking about a world that's changed over 12 times since then. I mean, we're using terms that don't mean what they used to mean anymore, that go back. I mean, the baby boomers are absolutely stuck on these terms because they define themselves. You know what a totem is from like Psychology 101, right? Elvis wears a leather jacket, so I wear a leather jacket, and that's who I am. Well, I'm a Democrat, or I'm a Republican, and this defines so many things about me. These things are not what we think they are anymore. I mean, to be a Democrat now, is that really the same as it was in 1968? I mean, it doesn't mean what it used to mean. To be an occupier is another totem. To be a Tea Partier is another totem. We're Americans. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to realize that unless you grab that person who thinks 180 degrees differently than you do, lock arms with them, we're not fixing this problem. And that's Goldman Sachs' biggest fear.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's kryptonite right now, see?
So that gives, we have 16 minutes. I want to talk about your crowdsourcing plan. I want to talk about the democratizing of the media, I guess, would be the way to, I want to talk about how are we going to marshal the resources that are given to us because of the internet, and really it's largely only because of the internet, those forces that are available to us now, that we can find a solution from within that large body of brains.
Here's where it came from. It came from my own inability to come up with what I call B. I can define where we are. I'm pretty good at, if I'm good at anything, it's telling you what things are like now. So I can talk to you about A. Here's the problem. And there are a lot of people who've come up with good solutions, which I call C. I mean, they come from the left, they come from the right. There's lots of ideas. But how do you get those ideas implemented? We have a system of government run through intermediaries, right? A Republican system of government has middlemen. If the middlemen are the people benefiting from the system the way it is, how do you get them on board to change a system that they benefit from? It's like asking the fox to redesign the chicken coop to make it harder for the fox to get in. This is what I call B. After I interviewed all the presidential candidates from the third parties and independent groups, and I asked them the same question. I said, I understand you've got ideas to fix things. How do you implement them? And nobody had any ideas for how to get past that barrier about a corrupt legislature that you then have to get on board to reform things. Nobody had an answer. And so I thought, well, okay, then this is the problem. The problem isn't coming up with solutions. The problem is coming up with implementation measures. And that was my idea originally, to go get all of the different the Young Turks host, Andrew Napolitano, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, all these people, and their audiences, not just these big brains, but all this massive brain power in the people that follow them. They're all working in their own little nodes. I thought, well, what if we could get these people together and start focusing on B? That did not work out as well as I wanted, so we've tried to do this through some other methods. Even if I don't do this, I would love for people to come together over this idea of implementation, because it seems to me that this is what's stopping us. I read all the time people coming up with solutions, and there's 20 good ideas for fixing this. We can't implement them. We've got to come up with a B, and that's what I wanted to get a lot of different, what did John Lennon said, 1,000,000 minds are better than one? That's what we need. We need the American brain power. Remember when they were working on the SETI program and everybody was having their computers linked together so you could maximize the computing power to work on this? We need to maximize our collective brain power to figure out how to implement something over the heads of the governmental middlemen who don't want this. A Republican system by default shuts down views from below that threaten, for lack of a better word, to use the old Ronald Syme line from history, the oligarchy. And the oligarchy isn't one group, it's everyone who has the ear of government now and who wants to keep it that way. How much money are you giving to politicians? How much money am I giving to politicians? The left gives money, the right gives money, but poor people don't give money. Middle class people don't give enough money to be noticed. We're the ones who can't get reform passed because we don't have the ear of the legislature, right? And if you promote something that will make it harder for the people who are currently elected to get reelected, they're not going to be very excited about that reform. That's the B we have to solve, implementation.
So we have to get through the membrane of the government.
That's right. And right now, any laws you pass through that corrupt membrane become corrupt. Or they, you could pass all these reform measures and they will end up, by the time they get through the corrupt membrane, with loopholes or with no money for enforcement or whatever it's going to take, to please the people who actually give the money. So that's why I say don't argue the gay Chick-fil-A issue, don't argue abortion. Until you fix that corrupt membrane, it doesn't matter what you get passed. It's not going to be what you think it's going to be.
All right. Now, I had thought that your search was for how to marshal the brain trust.
It is. But to fix that problem.
To focus on a specific thing.
How you get the reform ideas passed. And remember,
That's a challenge.
any good reform idea is going to upset the Democrats as much as it's going to upset the Republicans. And people forget that.
I'm not even willing to look at the Democrats and the Republicans. That's a mass. That is a single mass that we have to overcome.
With many of the same contributors.
Yes. Well, almost entirely all the same contributors.
Well, and I think if people, and I get this a lot on my discussion board, where there's, now that the election's getting close, you're seeing people come out and saying, well, yes, Obama's made all these mistakes, but he's better than Romney. This is the poison. And when people vote for the lesser of two evils long enough, you end up with this society and go, well, how did we end up with this evil society? Voting for the lesser of two evils over and over and over again.
Or to be more specific, voting for evil.
And you know what? Let me empower people for a second, because there's one thing people forget, and it's so simple and yet so unimaginable at the same time that it blows my mind. If we simply voted differently, we could change this. It's that easy and yet that impossible to imagine. If we all decided in one election that it's all a waste, we're all going to vote for some third-party candidate who promises to fix the corruption, we fix it. Well, or at least we start the process.
We start the process,
and that's actually within our power and unimaginable at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and
there's your wild card.
I'm pretty pie in the sky, but I have a tough time imagining if we were to get a third-party president in, it would do anything more than be like Jimmy Carter,
Well, but you know what?
Because then it all stops as soon as
I talked to Jill Stein about
happens.
this recently, and this is what it truly is. You need somebody, and the president can do this, who gets up and calls people out. They may not get any legislation passed, but they can turn around and say, by the way, Tom DeLay, who's not in power anymore, but Tom DeLay is blocking this bill, and he's getting money from Exxon to block this bill. I want you to call him right now. Here's his phone number on the screen. You literally call these people out. Forget that decorum that we have, amongst senators. You get up there and
the decorum is also a way to control.
That's right. But you get up there and you go Lyndon Johnson on them, but not privately to the public on television, on the internet. And you can do, she said, being able to simply get the news out there, tell the secrets. I mean, if you get out there and start spewing secrets, you will freak everybody out. And that right there will be a vast improvement on what we have now.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so this is a little bit different than I thought you were heading with this when you put it out there.
Where did you think I was headed?
No, you were more specific than I'd been reading, what you have on your boards and everything, but I didn't realize that, and I didn't listen closely enough to your program that it's all about the membrane. It's not about
You had to have me on the program.
In order to talk to you about it specifically.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do we get all those people together is the question. And what I'm finding through Occupy is those people are already there, and we still have a pretty small program, but we have people who are excited to get in touch with us and put and cover issues and let us know what's going on. Like I said earlier, I've got people down in Anaheim who are telling us this is what's going on. We had people on the streets when NATO was in Chicago telling us what was going on. So when you were putting it out there, you were talking, go get the pundits and their listeners. And what I'm saying is, go get the listeners. Don't worry about the pundits.
Well, and I want you to know,
once you have the listeners, the pundits will follow.
And we are doing that. And to be honest, we get so many, and a lot of them are Occupy supporters, people who listen to these programs and then contact me and say, I have this skill set, that skill set, what can I do to help? And
send them to me.
Well, I was going to say, to my terrible shame, I don't always know what to tell them.
Send them to me.
I'll send them to you. But I mean, they'll say, I'm willing to help, what can I do? this is part of the problem. I don't know what we mean. I mean, one of them started a Reddit subreddit page for us.
I saw that. Yeah.
Not working out as well as I would have liked, though. I mean, every time, I contacted all those people I mentioned to you earlier, only Glenn Greenwald got back to me. Their attitude is that they are doing something to help by doing what they're doing. They don't feel necessarily that this coagulation of audiences is so necessary.
Well, it's not necessary for them to do that, but it's necessary for somebody to do that.
And I think, as I said in the show, I don't feel up to that task, but somebody's got to do that. So if you're listening and you're out there and you're that person, I'll start forwarding those emails to you. But I think part of the problem is they look at the 60s, the last time we had a real feeling of change in the air, and look at how many people that you could name who were leaders, and I use that just like a dictionary term, leaders. How many can you name today? I feel, and that was one of my... How many
can we name today from the 60s, or who are still active today?
Leaders out there now. I mean, who's the Martin Luther King today? Who's the, the Jerry Rubin? There was 1,000 people you could name in their own notes who were literally grabbing a flag and saying, "Follow me."
Right.
If you look at history, leaderless movements are rare. And you can't have one. You need lots of people out there, and they're missing. And I don't know why they're missing. But that's what, when you talk about change, we're going to have to get some people out there willing to say, look, follow me. And maybe a bunch of them, because the Occupy people are not going to follow that Tea Party guy who grabs the flag and vice versa. I mean, but those people might get together in some kind of a summit and begin to bring their groups together. It's got to be a cross-platform and a cross-message group, because we're not powerful enough as the people for any one faction, because you instantly incur the ire and antagonism of the other faction, because we've been conditioned to divide and fight each other. Unless you can get people that the right trust and the left trust and the conservative all together and saying, believe me, this is something you can trust, we need your help, we're going to change things. When that happens, then your wild card is thrown, and then anything's possible.
Then anything's possible, right. Yeah, but it's not going to happen on common sense. You haven't got the time and the energy.
I don't have the skills or the talent, to be honest.
But it has to happen somewhere. I mean, there has to be a central place. You know, we can start marshaling all of that brain power. We can start, getting a little bit of each person's brain, reserved for solving this problem. Just like when we're searching for, with SETI, we can get a little bit of each person's brain coming out to solve that problem. But there has to be something in the center.
That's right. And that's what we were talking about. Try to get these people together and create something. But I don't know what that something is. I mean, we certainly have the tools. We have tools that the people in the 60s would have died for.
Oh, yeah.
Now, how do we use them? And we have to remember how young these tools are. I mean, people, you take a Facebook, look at I hate Facebook, but look at the reach of something like that.
There's never been that many people
what
connected.
could the 60s have done with that?
Throughout all of the history of humankind.
All the history of humankind. And when you say it that way, you realize that's untapped potential. That's right. That's right. And somebody's got to figure out a way to do that. And they've got to do it, to use it, to do B, to implement change. We've got lots of good ideas, have no way to implement them.
Right. And so that makes sense now. Your listeners are talking about, okay, we're going to do this social networking platform, and we're going to do this thing
to foster ideas.
To foster ideas.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, to foster ideas and bring all that
to do B.
To do B.
Yeah.
Right.
A is clear. We're all living in A.
We all understand just how screwed up things are.
And a lot of people have. I mean, I've heard constitutional convention ideas for C. I've heard voting changes for C. I've heard campaign finance changes for C. All of which sound great. How do you get any of them passed through the membrane, as you called it?
Right.
That's what we need to work on.
Do we need to avoid the concept of getting things passed?
I don't know how else you do something. I mean, and I think that's what protests are for. I mean, when we talk about getting the attention of the people in power, I think that's when you talk about 1960s style, out in the streets, getting clubbed on the head, unfortunately, mass protests.
Right. Well, I guess the question I'm coming to is, the government is malfunctioning. At
broken.
best.
I like saying broken. Yeah.
I didn't want to go so harsh. Okay, it's broken. It's broken. The government is broken. It's not working. So getting things passed and into that government, that's like throwing a bunch of baggage into a broken truck.
What's the alternative?
That's what I'm trying to find out. That's what I don't understand.
I don't think
we can't vote for evil, but that's all we have. That's all we're given to keep restocking our government with. And
I think if you were able, and this has always been my position on common sense, I believe that the two parties are the problem. And I believe they're the problem because you have two places that you can bribe. You have, George Carlin said we have one more party than the Soviet Union, right? The truth is that the Democrats and Republicans have become the people that keep third parties and independents out of the debates.
Yes.
They're the ones who elect the roadblocks that make it ballot access difficult and all these kind of things. They're the problem. If you wanted to pass something, how about just getting rid of the little d and the little r next to their name on the ballots? You would change the world. I mean, or put the corporate sponsors next to anything. You show Boehner's face or Dianne Feinstein's face on the TV. List the top 10 campaign contributors right next to it on a graphic. I mean, these are little teeny ideas that would shame people and change things. But again, how you do any of that is the key. How you implement
I'm not putting this forward as the answer, but I think culture war is, that's another topic we talk about on this program, is the concept that the culture is where it all happens.
But you're going to be fighting your countrymen then. You're going to be fighting your countrymen. The other side of the culture are Americans on the ground.
But you're going to be fighting your own countrymen if you're doing it in such a way that everybody is going to disagree with. But everybody seemed to get behind E.T., the extraterrestrial. Everybody seems to get all excited about that gymnast the other day who won gold medals. There's something that people feel good about and that they can be brought together with because it's American and it's acceptable. And right now, it's becoming more and more acceptable to say, something's wrong.
Sure.
And another thing we can do is make it. It's becoming acceptable to say that money has screwed up our electoral process.
Yes.
So
we have a corrupt system. We have a system that if we saw it in another country, we would label that country corrupt. And what I always say is, look, every government throughout the entire history of the world has had corruption, right? Sweden has it, Nigeria has it. But there's a tipping point, right? We've had it since the Articles of Confederation. Sweden can operate with its level of corruption and still function well. Nigeria, you have to pay the cab driver and the president and everybody in between to get anything done. Between those two extremes is a point where you can't have good government anymore.
Right.
And we've reached that point.
We've reached that point, and it's something that we recognize as a society now.
And nobody's in favor of that. I mean, unless you're Goldman Sachs, but I mean, right-wingers aren't in favor of that either. They don't want a corrupt government.
That's the thing that's the handle that we have.
That's right. It's unity.
That's where we're unified,
that's
and
right.
That's where we can enculturate it. Like it should be now where as soon as somebody's getting too much money to run their campaign, that's a strike against them.
Yes, and where you almost want to say that's a black mark. That's right. To be taking a lot of money is. But see, and again, and this is where I lose a lot of Occupy folks and a lot of folks from the left. That's got to include left-wing causes too, or you're going to look like a lot of campaign finance reform is nothing more than trying to eliminate the funding sources of the other side.
Exactly.
Right? When you say corporations,
across the board.
Right, you're going to eliminate right-wingers, and it looks like a plot to them. You've got to say, look, this isn't unilateral disarmament. We're going to take unions off the table, and we're going to take Walmart off the table. It's got to be everybody, or nobody's going to want to put down that sword first.
See, and we're just about out of time, so I hope I can get you back in here again because this feels like just the beginning of the conversation.
We'll see what the reaction is, right?
Yeah. But got anything else you'd like to say while I got you?
I appreciate being on. Thanks for having me.
I very much appreciate you joining me, and we'll see how it turns out, huh?
Stay safe, folks.
Okay, and thank you for joining us, Occupy TV. We'll see you again next time.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anytime. Old paisan from Southern California, the Valley.
Right, yeah. Here, sit down for a second.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop.